My name is Hale Mercer, and I want to tell you something about the moment everything goes wrong. Most species, when everything goes wrong at once, experience a period of processing, a pause while the mind catches up to the situation. A beat of stillness before the response begins. Humans do not have that pause. When everything went wrong for me, I was already moving before I had consciously decided to move, which is either a survival adaptation or a personal flaw, depending on who you ask. And I have never particularly cared which it was because it has kept me alive in situations that should have finished me several times over. This was one of those situations. I had been working a salvage contract in the Dravosi Outer Belt for 4 months, part of a 6-person crew on a vessel called the Haran, pulling valuable components from derelict ships and stations that had been abandoned over the years as the outer colonies shifted and contracted and left their old infrastructure behind. It was good work, physically demanding, and technically interesting, and the crew were competent people who I had come to trust the way you trust people, when your life depends on the same competence you are trusting. I was wrong about that trust, about one of them. His name was Drev, a Harathi with 9 years on salvage vessels, who had clearly been planning something for longer than any of us had known. What he had been planning was simple and ugly. The Haran's current salvage, a derelict cavalry research vessel, with an intact data core worth more than the rest of the contract combined, was worth enough to a particular Vithori buyer to make it worth removing the complications. The complications were the rest of us. I was outside the Haran in a salvage suit when it happened, working on detaching a secondary component from the derelict's outer hull, which meant I had approximately 30 seconds of warning when I saw through my helmet display what was happening inside the ship. 30 seconds is not much. It is enough. I detached from the hull before the Haran's docking system locked out my suit controls, which it did 4 seconds later. I pushed off from the derelict with everything I had and put distance between myself and the Haran before Drevin finished whatever he was doing to the rest of the crew, because distance was the only thing I had and I needed to use it before I lost it. The Haran moved away 7 minutes later, not fast because she was still attached to the derelict on the salvage lines and Drev had to cut them loose, which took time. But she moved, and she did not turn back. And I watched her go from 300 meters away in a salvage suit with 4 hours of oxygen, no propulsion beyond the small maneuvering thrusters built into the suit for fine positioning work, and no communication range beyond the short band that the Haran was no longer listening to. I spent the first 30 seconds watching the Haran leave. Then I turned around and looked at the derelict. It had been a cavalry research vessel, the Ardeni, abandoned 11 years ago when the research program it served was discontinued. The Haran's crew had been working it for 3 weeks, and I knew it better than most places I had lived. Every accessible section, every system we had tested and found dead, and every system we had found with residual function. One of those systems was a short-range emergency beacon in the lower communications array that we had powered up 2 weeks ago to test its function and found operational but limited. In range. Limited was better than nothing. I used the suit thrusters to move back to the Ardennes hull, slowly and carefully because the thrusters were built for fine work, not travel, and I had to be precise about every burst, and I found the exterior access panel for the lower communications array, and I got inside. The beacon was where we had left it, powered down after the test, but intact. I brought it back online, which took 8 minutes because the power junction needed manual cycling, and I was doing it in a salvage suit with gloves that were not built for fine work inside a panel. When it came on, I sent one signal on every frequency the beacon could reach, with my position, the Haran's last known heading, and 3 words that translated clearly across every standard outer belt language. Crew in danger. Then I went deeper into the Ardennes, because 4 hours of oxygen was not enough if the nearest response was more than 4 hours away, and the Ardennes had something I needed. We had found the emergency life support section in the first week. Non-functional, power long dead, but structurally intact. The oxygen reserves inside it had been sealed in the original pressurized containers, and we had tested 2 of them and found them still viable, which had been an interesting data point at the time and was now the most important thing in my world. I reached the section in 22 minutes and got the first container open and transferred the oxygen to my suit, which brought me from 4 hours to 9. And then I sat in the dark of the Ardennes emergency life support section and thought carefully about what I knew and what I needed to do with it. I knew the Haran's heading when she left. I knew Drev's likely destination based on 4 months of conversations that I was now recontextualizing in light of what he had done, and the Vithori buyer he had mentioned 3 times in casual conversation, in ways that had not seemed significant at the time and were very significant now. I knew the outer belt patrol routes in this section of the Dravosi corridor, because I had been flying them for 4 months, and I had a habit of learning routes. I knew that the nearest patrol waypoint was 6 hours from my current position at standard patrol speed. And I knew that if Drev reached the Vithori buyer before the patrol found the Heron, the data core would change hands, and my crew would have no one to speak for them except me. I spent the next 2 hours doing 3 things. The first was managing my oxygen carefully, because everything else depended on being alive to do it. The second was going through the Ardennes accessible sections looking for anything else that was still functional and useful, because I had time, and the habit of looking was not something I turned off. The third was writing everything I knew about Drev and the Vithori buyer and the likely destination into the beacon signal, in a continuous loop, because the patrol needed to know where to look, not just that there was a problem. The third thing turned out to be the most important. The Outer Belt Patrol vessel Soren reached my position in 5 hours and 40 minutes, which was 20 minutes inside my calculation, Mania's side, my calculation, and the officer who led the boarding of the Ardennes was a Kelvari named Tail, who moved through the derelict with the focused efficiency of someone who had read my beacon signal thoroughly and understood exactly what they were dealing with. She found me in the emergency life support section on my second oxygen container, calm and waiting, which she later told me was not what she had expected to find. You sent continuous updated intelligence in the beacon signal, she said. I had time, I said. You included the likely buyer destination, she said. 4 months of conversations, I said. He mentioned the location 3 times. Opal mentioned the things they are thinking about. You were floating in open space with 4 hours of oxygen, she said carefully. 9 hours by the time I found the reserves, I said, and I was not floating. I was in the derelict. There is a difference. She looked at me for a long moment. The Heron, I said. My crew. Being intercepted, she said. Based on the destination in your signal, we have 2 vessels moving to that location now. I let out a breath that I had been holding for 5 hours and 40 minutes. Are they alive? I said. We do not know yet, she said. We will know soon. She was right. We knew in 2 hours when the intercept vessels reached the Heron and found Drev still in transit, and the rest of the crew locked in the cargo hold, alive, because Drev had apparently not been willing to add that to what he had already done. I was on the Soren when the confirmation came through, and Tail brought it to me directly, which I appreciated, and I sat with it for a moment before I said anything. All 5, she said. Alive. Unharmed beyond the confinement. Good, I said. She watched me sit with that for a moment. You spent 6 hours in a derelict in a salvage suit, she said, calculating patrol routes and writing intelligence into a beacon signal for a crew that you could not reach and could not help directly. Yes, I said. Why not focus on your own survival, she said, the oxygen reserves, getting yourself to a safer section. Waiting. I thought about how to explain it, the same way I always thought about explaining the things that were obvious from the inside. Waiting felt wrong, I said. There was something I could do. The beacon signal. The intelligence. I could do that. So I did it. Even though you did not know if it would reach anyone in time, she said. Even though, I said. She was quiet for a moment. The Sarathi threat, asses, she said slowly, rates humans below average on individual survival capability in hostile environment scenarios. We rate poorly on the physical metrics, I said. It does not assess for this, she said. No, I said. It never does. She looked at me one more time with those Kelvari eyes that were doing careful and thorough work. When we reached you, she said, you were calm. I had done everything I could do, I said. After that, calm was the only useful option. She made a sound that was quiet and genuine and that I thought was probably the closest thing to admiration that a patrol officer on duty was going to express. The debrief took 4 hours at the nearest patrol station, and I gave them everything I had, every conversation, every detail, every calculation. When it was finished, Tail walked me to the transfer bay and stopped at the door. Hail, Mercer, she said. Yes, I said. 6 hours, she said. Alone in a derelict. And the first thing you asked me when I found you was whether your crew was alive. They were the point, I said. I was already handling my situation. Theirs was the one I could not handle directly. She looked at me steadily. The assessment is wrong, she said. About human individual survival capability. The assessment measures the wrong things, I said. Yes, she said quietly. It does. She walked back toward the operations section, and I walked through the transfer bay and found a seat and thought about 6 hours in the dark of a derelict ship and a crew that was alive because a beacon signal had reached the right people at the right time. That was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.